Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 8th meeting in 2013 of the Local Government and Regeneration Committee. As usual, can I ask everyone to ensure they have switched off mobile phones and other electronic equipment, please? Agenda item 1 is to consider whether to take agenda item 9 on our work programme in private. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 2 is subordinate legislation. We're considering two negative instruments: the Non-Domestic Rates Levying Scotland Amendment Regulations 2013 SSI 2013/34 and the Non-Domestic Rate Valuation of Utilities Scotland Amendment Order 2013 SSI 2013/36. Members of a cover paper from the clerk setting out the purpose of these instruments. The Subordinate Legislation Committee did not have any comments to make on either of these instruments. Are we agreed not to make any recommendations on these instruments? Thank you. Agenda item 3 today is an oral evidence-taking session on a negative instrument, the Non-Domestic Rating Unoccupied Property Scotland Amendment Regulations 2013 SSI 2013/37. Members of a cover paper from the clerk setting out the background to the instrument. The Sub-Leg Committee has drawn the attention of the Parliament to this instrument in relation to the clarity of Regulation 6, as well as on proper drafting practices for SSIs. These comments are set out in Annex A in the paper from the clerk. A motion to annul this instrument has been lodged by Margaret Mitchell, and we will consider that after this oral evidence session. Can I welcome Derek Mackay, Minister for Local Government and Planning, Graham Owenson, Head of the Local Government Finance Unit, and Colin Brown, Senior Principal Legal Officer with the Scottish Government. Minister, do you have any remarks on the SSI, please?
No remarks on the SSI. I think those two are straightforward.
Can I ask Margaret Mitchell if you have any remarks on the SSI?
Yes, this is my, are we on my motion to annul now?
No, that's next.
Okay, no, just move straight to the annulment.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for the Minister? Okay, no. Minister, I think I am getting words from the clerk here saying that you should be addressing the Non-Domestic Rating Unoccupied Property Scotland Amendment Regulations at this moment in time.
Convener, I think it would be particularly useful to have the opportunity to hear if the officials have anything to say, which of course they can't do under the next agenda item.
Your debate is next. Could you maybe speak to Margaret?
Still on two, so just to explain what two are.
So I was still on item 2, Chair.
No, we're on item 3.
Item 3.
Item 3 is
Minister, if you make a statement and if any of the officials want to come in, now is the time to do so.
Item 3 is the annulment, which I understand I'd be responding to Margaret Mitchell.
Item 4 is the annulment, Minister. Item 3, Minister, is evidence taking on the actual SSI itself.
Okay, I'll be speaking in terms of rebutting an annulment. If I'm clear that's what I'm doing, then that's what I'll proceed with. If that's with your...
No. Minister, the clerk will come over and speak to you. I'll suspend this for 5 minutes. I apologise to the masses watching this at home. It is, as the Deputy Convener pointed out, the 13th today, so maybe that's why these glitches are happening. Can I call on Margaret Mitchell to speak in terms of her annulment motion?
Right, thank you very much, Convener. As the committee will be aware, the Scottish Conservatives have consistently opposed Unoccupied Properties Bill and the policy behind it, which these regulations implement. This is the wrong policy at the wrong time, premised as it is on the fundamentally flawed notion that commercial properties are empty through choice, rather than due to a fundamental lack of demand and the current economic climate. Furthermore, not a shred of evidence has been presented by the government to suggest that owners of empty properties are keeping them unoccupied intentionally, nor has the government provided any empirical evidence suggesting the number of properties that will be brought back into use because of the relief cut. There was no formal consultation on the proposals contained in the bill, supposedly because, according to the Minister, of the scale of the issue, but all other parts of the Unoccupied Properties Bill were subject to formal consultation, including one that cost one local authority just £750,000 a year. It therefore beggars belief that a measure which would impose, according to the government's own figures, an £18 million burden on businesses was not formally consulted on, nor was any business or regulatory impact assessment carried out, despite the government's own guidelines, which state quite categorically that if a proposal imposes additional costs on businesses, then a BRIA is required. The Minister has claimed that undertaking a BRIA would not be proportionate, given the small amount of money the relief cut will raise, but failed to mention that in his very own guidelines it stated proportionality is only relevant to the content of any BRIA and not to the decision to actually undertake one. The Minister has been successful only in uniting business representatives across the board in their justified opposition to this unwarranted additional tax on retail and other business property from which unoccupied industrial property is exempted. As a consequence, bizarrely, as the Scottish Business Ratepayers Group has highlighted, internet retailers who are in direct competition with the retail sector on the high street and who are often located in industrial or warehousing space will be exempt from the reduced rate relief tax on their unoccupied property. Clearly, there is an inconsistency here with this poorly thought out policy which disadvantages the non-industrial business sector. The government has already admitted that the bill, as it was passed, would harm the very kind of speculative development that our economy needs to get growing by introducing the exemption for new built properties in these regulations. Quite simply, if the Minister had listened to the Scottish Conservatives and accepted the amendment I lodged at stages 2 and 3 of the bill, which would have secured this exemption in the bill then, a great deal of uncertainty and negative messages over speculative development could have been avoided. On this basis and for the reasons given, I urge the committee to support the motion which annuls the regulation, and I move the motion in my name.
You can move the motion when we get to agenda item 4, Mrs Mitchell. Stuart Stevenson, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. I think the Conservative position is well understood. It's been rehearsed on a number of occasions. But it misses some rather important points that actually run counter to what the Conservatives would traditionally suggest that they seek to stand for. One of the early contributions that was made in the, we've just heard, was reference to lack of demand for premises. Well, of course, what this instrument and the legislation does is promote demand by creating an environment where there is an incentive to price to let. Because rather to get money in from lets at a level that is sustainable in the current market situation than to have something sitting empty. And I think far from this being anti-business, this is a pro-business proposition. Margaret Mitchell said that this had united business. Very far from the case. There are many businesses who are finding that rental prices for properties are sufficiently high. They are unable to progress. And those businesses who will benefit from an increase in the supply to the market at an affordable price of premises will be very unlikely to feel that this is the kind of measure that should not be proceeded with. Margaret Mitchell said the economy needs speculative activity. Well, it's time to promote a bit more activity from the landlords, the owners of unlet premises, to price accordingly to get the economy moving. And that is precisely what can be created by this measure. Finally, Convener, I think the Conservatives too, as a party who would suggest, I would not necessarily concur, but they would suggest that they are fiscally responsible. They have to identify where the funds that might be coming to the government from this voluntary £18 million, because it can be avoided if you let your premises, where the 18 million might otherwise be placed in the government's books. So I think it is entirely appropriate that, having listened to the arguments and in due course hearing what the Minister has to say, that we continue to support this much needed change. Convener.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Convener. I've been waiting very keenly for this moment. I rebut Margaret Mitchell's motion to annul this SSI, the Non-Domestic Rating Unoccupied Properties Scotland Amendment Regulations 2013. The purpose of this instrument is to vary empty rates relief by regulation, as set out our intention during the Spending Review 2011. I acknowledge Ms Mitchell has been critical of this policy from the outset. Consistency indeed, but consistently inconsistent with what the Conservatives have done in office. In these challenging economic times, it is important that we ensure business rates reliefs maximise opportunities and allow Scotland to retain its position as the most supportive business environment anywhere in the UK. We also need to maximise the effectiveness of the £560 million worth of annual rates relief we provide to businesses and ensure they continue to provide the right incentives to support the economic recovery we need. These regulations will also create 2 new rates relief, which I announced after listening to stakeholders. The first being the Fresh Start initiative, which applies where a property has been empty for over 12 months and then becomes occupied, an incentive. To help support the diversification of our town centre properties, with a rateable value of under £45,000, which were previously occupied as a shop or office, or where there has not been previous use, the new use as a shop or office will be eligible for relief. For the first year of occupancy, the new occupier can apply for a 50% reduction in the rates payable capped by state aid de minimis. The Welsh Government announced on 5th of March that they will be introducing a similar scheme to the Scottish Government's Fresh Start relief. The second relief, New Start, will apply when a new property is first entered into the valuation roll on or after 1st of April 2013. The ratepayer can apply for 100% rate relief for up to 18 months while it is unoccupied, capped by state aid de minimis. The relief will run for 3 years and is being introduced 6 months ahead of the planned UK Government equivalent. New Start's aim is to continue to encourage speculative development and has been welcomed by the Scottish Property Federation. We remain focused on maintaining Scotland's position as the most competitive environment for business by offering a significantly more generous relief package than elsewhere in the UK. We're still protecting industrial and listed properties from the reforms to empty property relief. Despite UK Government funding cuts, this relief package, as I say, is worth over £500 million a year. To further support our businesses and high streets through our reforms and empty property relief, we also launched a review of our town centres. We all acknowledge that the role of town centres is changing and evolving. This change is having a visible impact on businesses and communities across the country. One of the key challenges for us all is ensuring that we are there to support the process of change, and that's going to be required to help turn around the fortunes of our town centres. We each share the objective of seeing them return to being viable centres for employment and services for local communities, a focus for entrepreneurial and civic activity. We've already signalled our support for the work of this review by announcing a £2 million fund aimed to help promote our town centres as attractive places, not only to work or visit, but places where people want to live. A report from the Town Centre Review is due in April to trial conversion from offices and shops to residential. It is Margaret Mitchell who is not only attempting to annul reform of empty property relief, but also the Fresh Start and New Start relief, which were a direct outcome of stakeholder engagement. In terms of some of the points that have been made around demolition and speculative development, on the Tory view of industrial properties, we've learned from the evidence in England what happened industrial, and that's why the exemption continues in Scotland. To refer to demolition refers specifically to the experience around industrial, and I would question why Margaret Mitchell would not want industrial to continue to be exempted. And we believe we have addressed points around speculative development in relation to our New Start relief. We must be adept to have an ability to change to circumstances. That's why the new bill is helpful, and we're able to return to regulations. We're also committed to a review and ongoing monitoring of the policy, and in recognising that the High Street is under pressure, I would question the Conservatives' point of view, is that why is it fair to make it cheaper to close your property in the High Street than to keep it open and trading? How exactly would that help the High Street? So for all these reasons, I would urge the committee today to reject Margaret Mitchell's motion to annul these regulations.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the Minister? John Pentland.
Not so much a question, Chair, but more of a statement. You know,
Mr. Pentland will have the opportunity to debate at the next item.
Okay, then
I think maybe if we could just stick to the questions at this moment in time. And I know that we have been a little bit here and there this morning, but I think that's probably best if we can do it that way. Any questions for the Minister? In which case, can we move on to item 4, which is the debate on the motion to annul the non-domestic rating unoccupied property Scotland Amendment Regulations 2013 SSI 2013/37, on which we have just taken over all evidence. I know that members want to speak in the debate. Mr. Pentland.
Thank you, Convener. I think the Minister will be aware that in the past, we in the Labour Party have agreed in principle that, something had to be done with regards to the unoccupied properties. But we believe that this instrument, which will probably go through, but I think it's just, just for the record, rather than incentivise, I think probably what we could see here is possibly a problem where this instrument would add to further unoccupied properties, and that's purely because we don't have any confidence in how this achieving this objective, because we don't believe that the work has been done to back it up. There has not been any BRIA done or any other impact assessment, and it's possible that we believe that this could be this measure could be counterproductive.
Can I ask Margaret Mitchell to move and to speak to motion S4M 05785, please?
Move the annulment of my name, Convener. If I could address what Stuart Stevenson has just said, he asserts that this rates relief cut would create an environment to incentivise price to let, showing just how out of touch he and this SNP government is. Doesn't he realise that that is already in place and that people are cutting rates to the bone and rental incomes to the bone in an effort to try and rent out property? The Ministers heralded this morning Two announcements, two measures, his fresh start, the speculative development exemption and new bill that should have been passed during the bill, the passage of the bill, and they rejected for no good reason that it seems to me, have had time to reflect and come back with this. These amount to more than sticking plasters on what is a fundamentally flawed act and policy, the only consequence of which will be to deeply damage business growth and economic development. Throughout the debate on this, there's been the assertion that this policy will bring businesses back into use. We've heard this time and time again without any evidence to support this, and perhaps when the Minister replies he could give us some indication of how many businesses are going to be brought back into use and how much money he thinks actually of this 18 million projected possible income will actually be collected. The Minister, either deliberately or through a fundamental misunderstanding of rates currently due on unoccupied property, has continued throughout to present this policy as one that will ensure landlords pay rates for vacant properties rather than let these properties go empty at no cost. But landlords already pay 50% on their vacant properties, which is once again proof positive that this rates relief reduction tax is not an incentive, as the Minister has repeatedly claimed throughout this process, but in reality an extended penalty on already hard-pressed businesses. By contrast, the evidence in the sector is that landlords are doing all they can to cut rents, and I hope Stuart Stevenson is listening keenly at this point. The Scottish Property Federation, for example, has listed examples of property owners cutting rents by up to half just to get their properties let out. Clearly, Minister, this is hardly the behaviour of absentee or disinterested landlords. What this policy will do is add further burden to businesses and property owners at a time when many are already struggling. All this without the most basic evidence to support the Minister's claim that this move will bring or even incentivise empty properties back into use. For this reason, I cannot support these regulations and will press my motion in my name, the annulment motion in my name.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to enter the debate? Minister, do you wish to respond to the debate?
Yes, thank you,
Please.
Convener. I would start, I suppose, by saying nobody likes paying more taxes. Nobody likes paying taxes. Nobody certainly likes more. And I wouldn't be surprised that some groups have expressed that in opinion. It's important that we get this policy right. That's why there has been an ongoing process of engagement that goes beyond a BRIA, a business and regulatory impact assessment. If members are familiar with a BRIA, you know what that involves, and you'll be able to, I think we can evidence as a government how we've gone beyond the expectations of a BRIA to assess where we can the impact of the policy and how we can address the policy formulation through these regulations and our proposals to maximise its effect. And in terms of the evidence, we've looked at all the available evidence that there is. Bearing in mind, of course, in relation to empty property rates relief, this was a policy that began under the Labour Party and then was emulated by the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats in England. We've studied very closely the command paper produced by the UK government. I assume Margaret Mitchell objects to that. We've studied very closely the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors' view of this, and we've listened very carefully to the evidence from Scottish Property Federation, CBI and others to come to a conclusion that yes, there were things we could do to make this policy better. That's amounted to the New Start and the Fresh Start initiatives, which I think address some of the concerns that had been raised. Now, we do have to balance the books. I thought the silence was deafening during the budget debate on what our counterparts and other parties would do to balance the books, and I didn't hear any substitute, to go back to Mr Stevenson's point, any substitute finance for the £18 million we think we will realise in terms of this particular budget saving. And the cost of this relief will still be over £700 million over a spending review period, and the total rates relief per year is now over £500 £1 billion. People appreciate the rates relief, but we're posing the question in a rates consultation to ensure that we get it right. So I think we have responded appropriately, and I do believe that this is both a cost-saving measure and a genuine incentive to bring empty properties that blight our communities back into use. And whilst it might not be universally popular by those folk who pay the taxes, it's certainly been far more popular from local communities across Scotland who want something done about empty premises on the high streets. I make the point again, the Conservatives in office have continued with this policy, and we certainly feel that it will add the necessary ingredient as part of regeneration of our country.
Thank you, Minister. Can I ask Mrs Mitchell to wind up and press her withdrawal, please?
Thank you, Convener. I'm afraid we've just heard the same old tired assertion reeled out by the Minister without any substance again to back them. Let's be in no doubt. Empty properties are already taxed. This is an additional penalty on business. Quite simply, no ifs, no buts. Fact. And I find it astounding that the Minister should look to what's happening in England, where incidentally they're reviewing this policy for good reason, and says, so we have to follow the same line. I wonder why on earth he advocates independence for Scotland. This is a fundamentally flawed policy which will damage business throughout the fact that no consultation has taken place, no BREA has been carried out, speaks volumes to the measures having to be done in the background to try and make it palatable, even workable. For all of these reasons, I cannot support these regulations and will be pressing the motion. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you. In which case we move on. The question is that motion S4M 05785 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? In which case we go to the vote. Those in favour of motion S4M 05785, please show. And those against the motion, please show. No. The number of votes in favour of the motion is 3. Number of votes against 4. The motion is therefore not agreed to. If we could move on to item 5, which is subordinate legislation. Today we'll be taking oral evidence on an affirmative instrument, the Valuation Postponement of Revaluation Scotland Order 2013 draft. Members have a cover paper from the clerk setting out the background to the instrument. The Subordinate Legislation Committee did not have any comments to raise in relation to this instrument. Minister, can I ask you to make opening remarks on this SSI, please?
Okay, thank you, Convener. Today I move the Local Government and Generation Committee to approve the Valuation Postponement of Revaluation Scotland Order 2013 SSI. The purpose of this affirmative instrument is to postpone the next business rate revaluation to 2017. As you know, the UK Government announced it would delay its next revaluation in England from 2015 to 2017 in October last year. This created a set of circumstances that could have undermined our continued commitment to match the English to poundage rate. Rightly, the business community have wanted the uncertainty removed. That is because the average rateable values of properties fell in Scotland as a result of proceeding with our own revaluation in 2015. The poundage would have been increased above the English rate in order to maintain the same level of income necessary to deliver the services on which businesses rely. The previous administration, of course, set the poundage higher in Scotland than in England for 7 consecutive years, putting all ratepayers in Scotland at a significant competitive disadvantage. I also recognise Collier's petition to the Parliament to have this decision overturned. However, the petition misses the point. To hold the next revaluation in 2015, as I have said, will put businesses in Scotland at a competitive disadvantage, as it would also mean raising the poundage rate above the rate set in England. This is something we're not prepared to do. For many, if there was a revaluation, it would be a zero-sum game. We have discussed this with stakeholders, and I think there's an impression that everybody would be a winner. That's not the case, and ministers have considered the implications of the policy fully. The Scottish Government's policy is to ensure that the poundage rate in Scotland will not rise above the English rate during the lifetime of the 2011-16 Parliament. In order to achieve this, we will hold the next re-evaluation in 2017. This instrument will result in the next Scottish re-evaluation coming into effect on 1st of April 2017. This will allow the same poundage rate to be set for Scotland as in England up to the end of March 2017. We have chosen to use this time productively to thoroughly and comprehensively review the rating system, beginning with our consultation paper on business rates, supporting business, promoting growth. The consultation sought views from all business ratepayers on two main areas: how the rating and valuation appeal system can support businesses and sustain sustainable economic growth, and how to improve transparency and streamline the operation of the rating system, including the appeals process, while still raising revenue to deliver services on which businesses rely. The consultation closed on the 22nd of February, and the report following the independent analysis of all responses will be published in due course. Any changes to the rating system resulting from this consultation will be put in place in time for the next re-evaluation, but where early actions are identified and affordable, these can be implemented much sooner. Convener, I'm happy to answer questions, any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Minister. And this is questions. We'll move into debate in the next item. Stuart Stevenson first, please, and then Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Convener. A couple of questions relating to the review of the rating system, which the postponement that this order brings to us creates the space to do. One is one of the issues that many smaller retailers in town centres have, and I'm uncertain because I don't have the evidence what lies beneath the comments, but one of the issues that is raised is that in a number of cases it is said to me that the supermarkets undertake gaming on the system by buying properties in town centres which they then let out at low rental in an attempt to influence what the prevailing rentals are at high rental, I do beg your pardon, at high rental, to influence what the rentals are and shift in their favour the rating in out of town as against central town by artificially seeking to inflate town centres. Now, I personally have no evidence that I can point to of this, but I'd be interested to know if that's the first question. The second question is whether for those businesses where rateable value is linked significantly to turnover, is there in the Minister's mind a view that this is something that again should be looked at as to whether if turnover is going to be the paramount determinant of rateable value for some businesses, whether in fact that should be applicable for all businesses, because that might of course more level the playing field between town centre businesses and very large out-of-town businesses. And I wonder whether creating the space by postponing allows us to consider these issues and other issues.
Minister, please.
In short, yes, the postponement will give us time to consider all these matters more fully, and a number of questions we've posed in the consultation paper. On the two key points on tactics, I mean, I have no evidence that I could confidently present to the committee today on how supermarkets deploy either their planning strategy or their rental strategy, although I may have some views on that. But I think this goes to the nub of the issue about rates revaluation. For everyone to assume that everyone would be a winner if re-evaluation went ahead would be wrong. There will be winners and losers in any re-evaluation, and there would be an interesting geographic spread, and even within geography and spatial sites, there'll be winners and losers based on who cited where. Now, I don't think there's any question high streets generally across the country are suffering, and maybe out-of-town sites, generally speaking, have fared better. So even to say of one sector, like the supermarket, the retail sector, would be better off with a revaluation wouldn't be consistent, wouldn't necessarily be truthful. On tactics, I wouldn't want to comment any further on that. On turnover, business rates, of course, are a property tax, not a profit tax, and some people do confuse that point. And it's still our proposition that the non-domestic rates continues to be based on the value and the rental as a property tax, not a turnover or indeed a profit tax. But there are some interesting considerations that the members raised in relation to that.
Minister, take an intervention.
Of course.
The Minister hopefully will be aware, however, that many rentals that are operated in the commercial sector will be tied to the turnover of business. So therefore there is not an absolute disconnect between the turnover of a business and the rental that is established in the commercial environment, and therefore is it not proper that at least we should consider, albeit we don't necessarily have the evidence, whether there should be that similar component in the taxation system in determining what the rental should be.
I understand the point the member's making, and you're absolutely right that rateable values are often driven by rents, which are driven by turnover in many respects in terms of the profitability in a business. So there is a linkage, but of course what the valuers assess is not the value of the turnover, but the value of the property. And yes, these measures, as you say, are an indicator and a factor within that. I mean, if we take one example, there's some discretion right now if there's a change of circumstances in a local place that the valuer or the local authority could amend and give some relief to those that have been impacted through a change of circumstances. And again, that might be tied to turnover, profitability, issues out with the control of the tenant or the ratepayer. So it is a very complex area, but your fundamental question was, is there scope to look at this? Well, there is, but our proposition is to continue with a property-based tax.
Thank you. Margaret Mitchell and then Stuart McMillan, please.
The Cabinet Secretary, John Swinney, made the decision or announced a decision to postpone business rates revaluation from 2015 to 2017 on the 27th of November last year. Can the Minister tell us what consultation took place prior to this announcement being made?
Minister.
The Cabinet Secretary, like myself, would have been discussing, because of the other issues around business rates, with a range of stakeholders what the options were. There was no formal consultation, but to arrive at this recommendation and this action today, a BRIA has been conducted, which is what members have asked for, as best we can conduct a BRIA in the circumstances.
Point out to the Minister that when I asked the Cabinet Secretary about the consultation that had taken place prior to his announcement, he couldn't name a single organisation with whom the government had consulted. Can you now, Minister, today?
I can say to you again that there was no formal consultation on the matter. That is an issue for government, and the partial BRIA that we've conducted is informing this debate this morning. But I can guarantee you that in conversations that would have come up in relation to rates, of course, people would have been asking ministers and the Cabinet Secretary what was likely to happen in Scotland as a consequence of the decision in England. Of course, the same decision has been taken by the Welsh administration as well. So there's no formal engagement or formal consultation, but I can guarantee you it's certainly come up in the conversation that ministers would have had with stakeholders over the last number of months.
That's a no then, Minister, that no organisation or business was formally consulted prior to the decision being taken. Thank you.
McMillan, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister. Minister, just a brief question. Do you have any indication of what the financial cost or the financial burden would be to businesses if the re-evaluation wasn't actually postponed?
If we tied to the manifesto commitment of maintaining the poundage with England, which is an aspiration, it's a manifesto commitment and something well worth keeping in line with. Our estimate is that non-domestic rates may well have had to be increased by around 20%, the potential cost.
If Mr Owenson wants to come in, Minister, that's appropriate.
It's about 60 million.
The exact answer, well, there isn't an exact answer, because until you actually do the revaluation, there can be no certainty. There are estimates that were prepared when England announced their postponement of the revaluation that estimate that values would have gone down by some 23 to 25%. That being the case, in order to maintain the same level of income, then there would have been a corresponding increase in the poundage level of the same proportionate amount. But the impact on the individual businesses would have been different. So unless you actually undertake the revaluation, there isn't no definitive answer to the question.
But it's fair to assume that certainly there would have been an additional cost burden to Scottish businesses.
Yes, I mean, if the re-evaluation had gone ahead and it had reduced values, if we make that assumption, then it would have meant to maintain the poundage, to be able to achieve that, there would have been a direct consequence, there would have been a direct increase in rate for some, but we can't say to which sectors and to which businesses because it's all based on revaluation itself. So what this has given is certainty around that.
Margaret Mitchell, please.
Despite this kind of speculation into what may have happened, a re-evaluation that hasn't taken place and is going to be postponed, isn't it the case, Minister, that as a direct consequence of the postponement, businesses across Scotland are now continuing to have to pay good time rates until 2017, despite having to trade through some of the current recession and the most challenging economic times and conditions imaginable? And that's the reality of the result of this postponement.
Well, of course, the same would apply for England and now for Wales as well. The member may want to argue again for Scottish independence once more, and I'm quite sympathetic to that. I'm also sympathetic to having a range of financial levers so that it's not just non-domestic rates that the Scottish Government is in some ways dependent on. But because of the most generous package of reliefs in the United Kingdom as well, I think it's helping a lot of businesses sustain their operation in very difficult times. For example, the small business bonus, I think, has been a great relief to the high streets. Many businesses pay nothing and many more have a discount on their rates. So I think the relief package that's been put in place has been of particular assistance to businesses in these difficult times.
I find the Minister's obsession with what's going on in England absolutely fascinating, considering he's supposed to be standing for an independent Scotland, but I suppose that's up to him. I wonder then, he'll be aware surely that there's transitional relief south of the border to compensate for potential impact on businesses as a result of the revaluation, and they can limit how much their increase or decrease and take cognizance of individual circumstances. Is he going to put the same transitional relief here now he's been whispered to by the official?
Well, the point I was just wanting clarity on, just so the member understands this as well, is you can't have transitional relief if there's no transition, and if there's no transition if there's no re-evaluation. So it's a straightforward point that I wanted clarity on there. So we're not having the re-evaluation.
In 2010 at the last revaluation, so it's been in place. We haven't had it here. Is he now going to do it now? He's extending this to 2017. Seems absolutely fair that we take cognizance of the new circumstances.
If you're familiar with the transitional relief takes effect where there's been a change to the rateable value. There's no revaluation, therefore it's not required, and there's a view whether it would actually help some businesses who will have a different set of circumstances. The important point, and one of the assumptions that Margaret Mitchell is making in all of this, is that every business would be a winner. Every business will pay a smaller rates bill as a consequence of re-evaluation. That is absolutely not the case. It'll be different from sector to sector, and for the reasons I gave earlier, it'd even be different in different parts of the country. For many, it'll be a zero-sum game, because what they maybe gained in a re-evaluation, they would lose in an increased poundage. And I haven't heard the member object to trying to give Scotland that competitive advantage. The reason I keep a very close eye on what happens to other parts of the United Kingdom, just like the planning system, is to make sure that Scotland is at a competitive advantage. And because of the poundage rate, because of the rates relief, because of the general environment we create for business in Scotland, I think that does put us in a very good place indeed. And as it relates to this policy, I think we're able to do better than is happening in other parts of the UK because of our comprehensive package of support.
John Pentland, then Anne McTaggart, then Stuart Stevenson, please.
Thank you, Convener. Like Margaret Mitchell, you know, I sometimes wonder if the Scottish Government really are want independence, because whenever there's an opportunity for a decision to be made, you sometimes, how or other, you know, put it aside and, you know, and then refer to our brothers in England. And again, I think this is a very, very good example of that, is that, you know, as a government, you're frightened to make that you know, that decision. The two questions I would like to ask, Minister, is do we have any guarantee that a revaluation won't be postponed any further?
And the second question is, what projections have been made, assumed for future property values?
Minister.
Unless the government becomes a self-perpetuating oligarchy, I can't make a prediction that any future government minister or indeed government can rule it out in the future. But what I've set out is what our intentions are for the period that we're in office, which is to put Scotland at a competitive advantage, to make this a great place to do business, to postpone the re-evaluation and do it within the time frame that I've set out, and there's no reason it can't be done in that time frame. I do disagree with your comments around whenever there's a difficult decision to be taken, we follow Westminster. I mean, the Labour Party in Wales, as I understand it, are taking the exact same decision on re-evaluation. Why is that the case? If you set out a manifesto aspiration that says we want to put Scotland in a good place to do business and we don't want the Scottish poundage rate to be higher than that which is set in England, we have to see what's happening in England to make that policy take effect. And that's why our actions have followed from what's happened in England, as I say, emulated. Wales have done the same. Northern Ireland circumstances are completely different. Now, just as we want access to all the levers of financial control and access to our resources, of course Scotland generates more than is spent here. I think many opportunities come with independence, but just sometimes, I would argue to Mr Pentland, just sometimes it's worth keeping an eye on what our counterparts are doing in other administrations and doing that wee bit better than them. But I'm perfectly confident with the timescale we've set out and the justifications we've made for making this decision, and I haven't heard any member either in the Chamber or on the committee so far come up with an alternative suggestion that would be good for business.
Anne McTaggart, please.
Thanks, Convener. Minister. How would you, Minister, react to the possibility that these measures will penalise family and small businesses who had acquired a property in better economic circumstances, only to have the value reduced significantly post-2008, who feel that not only would they be forced to sell their property as a result of the loss of the re-evaluation, and in many circumstances could be forced into a position of negative equity?
Minister.
I think that's an excellent question, and if I could respond in kind, the example that Anne McTaggart gave was of a small family business, say in a local town. That small family business is very likely to be paying no rates whatsoever right now, so re-evaluation would quite possibly mean no change for them, because that small family business, dependent on the value of the property, as I say, may well have small business bonus, which, for the rateable values, has supported a great number of businesses. I think it's actually 2 in 5 premises have had their rates removed or reduced. Now, that number has been increasing across the country year on year, and the current estimate of what that particular relief costs is for the year 12-13, £145 million. That's £145 million worth of support to the kind of small businesses that you very eloquently characterised as a scenario there. Over the spending period, the relief amounts to £711 million relief for an invaluable relief supported by, for example, the Federation of Small Business. Although even after amendment, it's still not quite as costly as empty property rates relief that we were debating just moments ago. So I think that relief's been absolutely invaluable. In addition to that, there's a range of work going on in partnership with local government on regeneration of town centres, and crucially a question in the rates review that's ongoing about giving local authorities discretion, potentially. You are formerly of Glasgow City Council, and they've got a particular package around supporting almost mini enterprise zones, whether that's a high street, a property or an area. And there's good work, if I can be generous enough, in England, where there is some legal flexibility to give some rates relief and to give that to local authorities to determine where you would give extra support, and we're probing that in our current consultation. So over and above that which we give to support businesses and town centres and small businesses right now, we're looking at the prospect of giving greater flexibility to local authorities, as long as they're willing to pay for it, of course, to create many enterprise zones, which might be a property, a street or a community, to give further discretion around rates relief. So I'm fairly confident that the package of support is is adequate, indeed generous, more generous than any other part of the United Kingdom, but we're looking at how we can do more. I hope that answers the member's question.
Stuart Stevenson, please.
Thank you, Convener. It's just a quick question in relation to transitional relief. And I wonder if the Minister could confirm that both in relation to the previous revaluation and any future one, that transitional relief to those who were having their increases in payments moderated by such relief would actually find that it was paid for by both postponement of those who would benefit from a reduction in their rates, that it is a net-sum game, and that just as there may have been businesses in the last revaluation who wanted the introduction of transitional relief because they might benefit from postponement of extra costs, there were very large numbers of businesses who were desperate to ensure they got the reduction in taxation that they were paying at the earliest possible opportunity.
Minister?
That's absolutely correct.
Just 2 points very briefly, Convener. Surely the Minister must accept that this rates review consultation is less than effective, to say the least, given that their bombshell decision to make the postponement of the revaluation was a fait accompli right in the middle of it without consulting any businesses or organisations prior to this. And will he confirm, by postponing the revaluation, the majority of business, and I don't think anywhere I said all businesses, the majority of businesses are now paying rates determined by much more favourable market conditions that no longer exist, and that therefore these rates are often no longer affordable by these businesses. And I just wonder, that being the case, where this leaves the Scottish Government's own rhetoric on its governing principles of taxation, which the Cabinet Secretary made to the Parliament when he said the burden of taxation is to be proportionate to the ability to pay.
I'll take you in. Minister?
I suppose my first response is in the item this morning I was told that the BRIA was the be-all and end-all of consultation with the private sector on policy matters. Now I'm told that a BRIA, as best we can do it, a partial BRIA is not good enough in terms of engagement with the private sector, which is completely contrary to what I heard this morning. The reason we can't have a full BRIA, of course, we can't assess the full impact, because to do that you need a revaluation, and the purpose of the order is not to have the re-evaluation for the reasons I've given. And Margaret Mitchell makes the point about our policy choices. I mean, I think other parts of the United Kingdom look very jealously at our economic recovery plan and our economic policies, but if only we had all the powers to maximise the opportunities to build economic recovery in this country rather than stagnate economic recovery, which is what the UK Chancellor is doing. But the clear commitment we made around the poundage, a policy, a commitment that was never delivered by our predecessors, is being delivered by this action today and has been delivered over the last number of years in terms of matching the poundage rate with Scotland to England, so that Scotland remains at a competitive advantage. And in terms of no business support, I would refer the member to the comments of the CBI, hardly the closest ally of Scottish Government, that said within the limitations that we face this was the right thing to do.
Question, Minister, do you confirm that businesses are stuck with good times rates when the good times no longer exist?
I think you asked me a number of questions and I've been able to go over all of them.
If you would just address yourself to that.
In terms of the questions, again, you make the fundamentally wrong assumption that every business, every property, in every area would benefit.
Minister, I already said that wasn't the case.
The Minister, give the Minister the opportunity to respond, please, Mrs Mitchell. Minister?
Every business would benefit from a rates re-evaluation. To assume it was good times for everyone before and it's bad times for everyone now, that fundamental proposition is not accurate. I will, be candid that, of course, for some, the postponement of re-evaluation, we'll never know what they might pay because we're not having the re-evaluation. For some it would have went a different rates bill. Of course that's the case, but you can't make the universal charge that Margaret Mitchell has.
Thank you. Stuart Stevenson, please.
Can the Minister confirm that the amount that an individual business pays as a proportion of the overall amount raised from business rates is determined by what proportion of the overall valuation of properties across Scotland their property represents. And that the only way to reduce tax take for all businesses is to reduce uniform business rates. It is utterly irrelevant what the rateable value is. It is only relevant for businesses relative to other businesses, and for every winner, there will always be a loser, unless you reduce the uniform business rate level altogether.
That's exactly why I focus on the poundage, because that's the formula that determines how much you actually pay in a bill to the local authority that then comes to Scottish Government, and then we give the resources back to the local authorities.
Minister, you mentioned at the outset that there may be quite large geographical differences. Could that re-evaluation, if it went ahead, actually stymie economic growth in certain areas of the country?
I mean, I suppose that really would be speculating, and I wouldn't want to do that. What I'm indicating is the nature of the economy and recovery has different strengths across the country. Your own constituency in your own Aberdeen has a completely different experience right now, sector by sector, area by area, as to, for example, some parts of, say, the Central Belt. So different pressures are being experienced, but for some that are enjoying a stronger economic recovery, that may well have meant higher rateable values, that may well have meant a higher rates bill, that may well have meant a bigger tax bill, to the point that could that then discourage growth, possibly?
Just to clarify, in terms of re-evaluation, there are always winners and always losers. Can you maybe comment on what happened at the last re-evaluation? Do officials have that?
There you go.
And I don't have the exact statistics, but from my memory of it was that in relation to particularly around the decision not to have a transitional relief scheme, was that if we'd had a transitional relief scheme, the balance would have been to favour the public sector at the expense of the private sector, and for those reasons the government took the decision that was not something they were prepared to do.
I think that's very useful. Thank you very much, Minister, for that evidence. If we could move on then to agenda item 6, which is the debate on the motion to approve the draft valuation postponement of Revaluation Scotland Order 2013, on which we have just taken oral evidence. Does any member wish to speak in the debate? No. Okay. In which case, can I ask the Minister to move motion S4M 05883?
I move.
Thank you very much. The question is that motion S4M 05883 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Okay, we move to the vote then. Those in favour of motion S4M 05883, please show. And those against motion S4M 05883, please show. The number of votes cast are 6 in favour of the motion, 1 against. The motion is therefore agreed to. Thank you very much, Minister and officials, for your evidence today. Can I maybe suspend for a few minutes to allow the witnesses to leave? Thank you. If we can move on to agenda item 7, which is update report from our committee reporters on the work they are undertaking on Scottish local elections. Can I ask John Wilson to provide the committee with an update? John.
Thank you, Convener. It's just an update from Anne McTaggart and myself in terms of acting as the reporters on behalf of the committee to carry out this brief inquiry. The remit for the inquiry, just to remind members, it was set by the committee and it's to look at Scottish Local Authority elections 2012 and to investigate 8 key issues, that is voter turnout and how this can be increased, voter registration and how this can be increased, proxy voting including postal voting and signature verification, the terminology used in and around elections, reasons why people do not vote, Robson rotation in respect of the ordering of the ballot paper, diversity amongst voters and elected representatives, including any matters associated with the eligibility to stand, donations and the nomination process, the timing of future elections with a view to minimising clashes. We have to report to the committee identifying any areas upon which we consider there is need for further action by Easter 2013, and you will hear later in my report, Convener, some action we need by the committee on this date. Initially, we have asked those bodies who gave formal evidence to the committee last year to come and update us. A call for evidence was sent out on the 25th of January 2013 and wrote to all local authorities, all political parties and all who gave evidence to the committee. The call for evidence was put on the website. The closing date for evidence was the 1st of March 2013. To date, we have received 15 submissions. The Scottish Government wrote to the convener on the 5th of March indicating they would not be making a submission and indicating that they would not be responding, but that they were interested in our findings and would respond to any points raised in a report. We took evidence from Scottish Government officials on the 6th of March. We are due to take evidence from the Electoral Commission tomorrow, that's Thursday 14th of March, and from Dr Clark on the 28th of March. Unfortunately, a meeting with the Electoral Management Board had to be cancelled and has been rearranged for the 2nd of May. Having reviewed the written evidence, we are also keen to hear from Dr Gilmore, and we hope to hear from Dr Gilmore on the 18th of April. It has become clear that we are unable to fulfil our remit in the original time allowed and ask the committee for an extension to complete our work and write our report to you. We suggest that the end of May would be a more appropriate timescale to allow us adequate time to hear evidence and consider our report.
Thank you, John. Anne, do you have anything to add to that report?
No, just to say that we've kick-started it and it's all looking good, and we're looking into various models and taking loads of different evidence actually, so it's all very interesting and allows to extend that to bring back a full report to the committee would be advantageous.
Thank you. Are there any questions from committee members for the reporters? Stuart McMillan, please.
Thank you, Convener. Just in terms of the writing out to the local authorities, were there any specifics or any questions posed regarding local authorities where independent councillors actually were elected? Because I know you said you've written out to each of the political parties, which is certainly very, very much the right thing to do. But in terms of areas where actually councillors who are non-politically aligned, is there any way of actually trying to kind of get some, make sure you can try and get some feedback from them?
We've received feedback from a number of the local authorities. The local authorities themselves tend to refer us to the Electoral Management Board report, which was presented after the election last year. But we have received individual submissions from, and I believe they are, one or two of them are independent councillors, but they are leaders of authorities who have responded to some of the issues. In relation to the political parties, up until last week, we hadn't received any feedback from the political parties, but we have requested clerks write to the political parties to seek responses from them and to help us and assist in the deliberations on the issues around the local government elections.
Stuart?
Would that be all political parties that are represented, or all political parties who stood in the elections in last year?
The call for evidence was to local authorities. It would be up to the local authorities themselves how they, and I understand Mr McMillan's concern is that when committees do write to local authorities, it tends to either go to the Chief Executive or the Leader of the Administration without any reference to the individual elected members. What we will take on board is to write to David Parker as a representative of the independents, I believe, on the COSLA.
Okay. Any other questions? We have a question that needs to be put. The question is that we agree to amend the timetable for the inquiry to the end of May 2013 so as to allow the reporters to make a report to the committee on the issues they are examining around Scottish local government elections. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. And if we can move on to agenda item 8, which is public petition as PE 01433. It's consideration of our approach to that petition, which is in the name of John Hancock's, on productive land for landless Scots to grow their own food. We have a paper from the clerk setting out the background to the petition. Are there any comments that members have on the petition? Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you very much, Convener. I think the petition is interesting. And the paper is a helpful delineation of the underlying issues. It does seem to be, however, and I'm interested to hear others' views on the subject, that with the land reform group that's being led by Dr. Alison Elliott, to be blunt, that is where this kind of issue, with the broad remit that that group has, perhaps might first and most usefully be considered, and that one of the things we might consider, and I'm in your hands procedurally in this matter, Convener, is whether in fact, although it's come to us, it really is better that they in the first instance, as they go around Scotland gathering evidence and as they deliver a series of interim reports, that they perhaps consider whether they could pick this one up in the first instance. I don't think we necessarily resile ourselves from future consideration of the issue. I'm merely meaning that for the time being, that might be the best way of dealing with it.
Thank you. Stuart McMillan, please.
Thank you. I agree with Stuart Stevenson, but also in terms of our committee and our work programme, also the members who attended Glasgow only 3 or 4 weeks or so ago, we heard some compelling evidence from Gal Gale in terms of actually utilising land once again and getting community involvement. So I think it would be very useful for us to even hear some further evidence from the petitioner as part of maybe the regeneration inquiry going forward, just to maybe help maybe kind of shape some further thoughts and opinions. But I do also agree with Stuart Stevenson's point in terms of kind of the wider picture. It probably isn't something that's solely for us, and I would suggest it probably would be better directed elsewhere. But I think there is still an opportunity there for us to hear maybe some further information.
Okay. I wonder if Anne and John, as members of the Public Petitions Committee, have any comment on it.
Convener, thank you. Just to, first of all, declare an interest. I've carried out some work with John Hancock in the past, and has held a number of events in the Parliament, particularly around Apple Day, in which I was a co-sponsor, have been a co-sponsor of in the past. Just to remind committee members, the Public Petitions Committee can only pass on petitions to committees of the Parliament. We are not empowered to pass on petitions to other external bodies or inquiries that are being conducted. But certainly it's a suggestion that I think this committee may wish to take up, because the Public Petition Committee has now passed it over to this committee to deliberate on and come to conclusions. In relation to the issue in taking evidence, and Mr McMillan suggested we take evidence from the petitioner, I would suggest that there is enough information in the work that's been done by the Public Petitions Committee to allow this committee to take forward any suggestions or any discussions that have been held within the Public Petitions Committee. And I would, at the present moment, say I don't feel it would be necessary to take evidence from Mr Hancock, as he already gave evidence to the Public Petitions Committee. The issue for the Public Petitions Committee was quite clear. We felt by passing it on to local government and regeneration, it would fit in with the regeneration inquiry to look at some of the issues that clearly the convener and other members of the committee have identified in terms of community land ownership and how communities can be more greatly involved in actually organising themselves around the use of existing community land where that community land is at the present moment unproductive. And I think that ties in with the original objective of the petition, is to try and free up more community land to put it into productive use for local communities. And knowing the petitioner, I know some of his ideas in terms of community allotments, community grow your own projects. So it really is about, and it was remitted to this committee on the basis of the regeneration element of the inquiry, to allow the committee to consider, along with other submissions, the issue about how we engage fully with communities to utilise and make best use of any identified land areas that could be turned into productive use for those communities.
Anne McTaggart, please.
Yeah, just really to agree with everything that John Wilson had said there, but also it's important that from the declared an interest on the Public Petitions Committee and was one of the ones that had passed it over here. But at that time, I had been thinking about the forthcoming Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill, such as the use of vacant and derelict land. I thought it would be important. I thought it tied in with great evidence, and I think the evidence. I don't know if we do need to have the petitioner here, because we have, like John Wilson has said, we have an array of evidence that has already been taken by the petitioner. But I think it fits in well with what we're doing with regeneration, but also with the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill for evidence.
Stuart Stevenson, please.
I wonder if our colleagues from the Public Petitions Committee, was this the only committee to which they referred this? Right, thank you.
Okay. Well, we have a number of choices that we can make here. I think that their suggestion from Stuart Stevenson to write to Dr. Alison Elliott's group is a very good one. Could we agree to do that as a committee?
Agreed.
Mr. Hancock's himself, which part of the country does he come from?
East Lothians.
Okay. I was going to suggest maybe he could be invited to one of our events in communities, but maybe South Ayrshire is a little far for him to come. That's the next one. I have got absolutely no problem at all in involving Mr. Hancock's in either round table events for the regeneration inquiry, or although I think that Anne's suggestion round about the Community Empowerment Bill is probably more important in that regard. Can we maybe agree to leave this off in terms of the regeneration inquiry, but maybe call on Mr. Hancock's as part of a round table when we get to the Community Empowerment Bill? Would that be agreeable to the committee? Thank you very much. We now move into private session and I suspend. Thank you.